To those who don't know me yet, I'm Paz Ferrer, and I'm in charge of communications in EcoAXA, which is the company promoting the Natural Capital Factory, the platform organizing today's webinar in collaboration with the International Union for Nature Conservation. And I'd like to welcome and thank you all for joining our webinar on corporate biodiversity performance. Today's topic is based in the IUCN's project draft guidelines for planning and monitoring corporate biodiversity performance. And this draft version is still available for comment until this Wednesday. So your participation today can be of great help to adapt and improve the final version. And so please feel free to share your comments, your ideas, your questions and your experiences, because we think this is the point of the webinar. Well, first, I'm not sure if everybody has had the opportunity to review the guidelines that we mentioned in our previous emails. But in case you don't, just a quick reminder of our topic today, okay? Bear in mind this question, so later we can have an enriching discussion about them. What are the main challenges that you are facing when it comes to plan suitable biodiversity goals, choose biodiversity indicators, and collect, present, and analyze data in a way that facilitates result-based management and corporate biodiversity reporting? Okay, we will talk about all this later with Julia's presentation. We will introduce very briefly our speakers today. The first one is David Alvarez. He is Executive Director of EcoAXA and also Director of the Natural Capital Factory. And Julia Carbone, she is Deputy Director of the IUCN Global Business and Biodiversity Program. So now, David, if you want to start with your presentation.
Paz, thank you so much for introducing Julia and me, and thank you so much all who are joining this webinar on corporate biodiversity performance, which marks the first of a series of webinars that we are planning to organize in the following months with the aim to enable a supporting and participatory space for Spanish organizations from all areas of society interested in learning from others, collaborating, sharing experiences, and exploring solutions to the many current challenges associated with biodiversity and natural capital. We are very proud to have Julia here today, and not only Julia, but all the members that from Natural Capital Factory who are today with us. So we hope you really enjoy this webinar. To those who don't know yet what's the Natural Capital Factory, this is the Spanish regional platform of the Natural Capital Factory, or the Natural Capital Coalition, sorry. A platform bring together the Spanish community around natural capital approaches with the aim of ensuring that nature is fully included in decision making. That's our main aim. It's how to really include natural capital and biodiversity into decision making. So, and that's the focus of this webinar today and the others that we will have in the future. The Natural Capital Factory also promotes analysis, dialogue, and the Spanish representation on the global movement on natural capital, and offers ongoing and specialized information and training on news, development, and market trends related to natural capital business management. As you may know, the Natural Capital Factory is structured in 4 working areas: the hub, the factory lab, the communication area, and of course the sectoral groups in which we are working very deeply. For instance, in one of these sectoral working groups that we're working right now, we're currently running the Spanish energy cohort in collaboration with many of the Spanish largest energy companies. The objectives of this working group on natural capital and energy are to facilitate the natural capital integration into the Spanish energy sector, help members to generate natural capital information that can be integrated into their existing businesses processes, such risk assessment, procurement, operational delivery plans, financial planning, sustainability, and integrated reports, and a large sector issues. To provide useful tools to help Spanish companies in the energy sector to make better decisions that can affect the health and the state of natural capital. In this natural capital journey accompanying the Spanish energy sector, we have navigated across processes similar to those described in the guidelines that Julia is presenting today. For instance, we have long discussions defining scopes of biodiversity influence, a sector at technology levels, or identifying what companies, activities, or technologies have more relevance in terms of biodiversity impacts or dependencies. There is an increasingly number also of businesses who are willing to address the needs for information on the state of biodiversity, the pressures on species and ecosystems linked to the operations, and the effectiveness of the responses in order to plan and monitor the operation. It's likely that some of you are also dealing with these issues or other problems, so it would be great to hear from your experience. I'm sure that Julia will really appreciate for your participation, which will help her to fit and improve the final version of the guidelines, which, if I'm correct, please, Julia, correct me if I'm wrong, it's planned to be released in January 2021. But it's better that Julia, who's leading the project we are discussing today, confirms this information and provides you with more detail on the project and next steps. Julia, thank you so much for joining us. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, David. Thank you all. Let me share the screen. So first of all, thank you for the invitation. It's an honor to be here. Can you just confirm, Paz, that you can see my screen?
Yes, yes, we can see it.
Perfect. On the right format is a presentation, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. So thank you all for attending, and and thank you for Paz and David for organizing this, this session to really collect your views on these guidelines. As David mentioned, these are draft. They're out for comments. We posted them at the end of July for a couple of months, but I'll give you some more guidance on how to eventually provide more comments. But the idea was really to get this first round of comments from people before we finalize, so that we are able also to see what are the areas that need more clarification, what are the areas that, for example, might need further work later on. But the structure of the process very likely will not really change. I mean, we have received comments. The comments so far have been pretty positive, a lot of comments, but generally, indicating that the process that we have put forward is acceptable. I mean, it's something that companies understand and fits already in some of the processes that have already started. So let me get into the proper discussion. First of all, I can't change the slide. Okay. Before I dive into the guidelines, I wanted to give you a context. So the context is really the global biodiversity framework post 2020 and the role of business. There is more and more discussion and pressure for non-state actors, including business, to take action. The network, this network that you are a part of, There are other global networks, science, such as the Business for Nature, science-based target networks that are bringing together businesses to take proper action and contribute to global, to bigger efforts such as the global goals and global biodiversity framework by taking action at the project level. And then the question therefore becomes, if a company takes action, makes commitments at the corporate and take action at the site level, how do you actually measure, how do you know that you actually have made a contribution? So this is where measurement becomes a very important element. So we all have heard many times that in order to manage, you need to measure, and this is still very true. But I would say even in order to claim, you need to measure, so that
Julia,
is
just
also
a quick suggestion. If you could share your presentation in full screen, that would be great.
Okay. Yes, like that?
Great, much better.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
Perfect, thank you. So the idea of being able to measure is not just in order to manage better, which is obviously a very important factor, but also in order to be able in the future to be able to say, to be able to claim a contribution to global goals in terms of conservation, you still need to be able to say, to be able to measure what has been the contribution. So this is why we feel like the conversation we are having about guidelines for performance management, performance, planning and monitoring is critical. This conversation started many years ago with, 3 years ago with the University, Oxford University and the Species Survival Commission. And the first question we asked ourselves was, what do we do with all the different systems that are out there that provide indicators and ways to measure performance that business can use? Are they all the same? What type of, what is their purpose? So in a paper that we issued in 2018, we tried to put systematize all the existing indicator frameworks that are out there, such as, for example, the Global Reporting Initiative Guidelines for Biodiversity. And we match them to specific purposes. So we say, there are a lot of indicators out there, indicator systems, but you can't just use one. The use of them has to be dictated by what is the purpose. What are you trying to do? Are you trying to communicate to your stakeholders? Are you trying to publicly report? Are you trying to respond to requests from the financial institutions to be able to, to give you a score, a financial score? So the whole idea is that you can't just pick and, you have to choose indicators that are fit for purpose. And therefore, the first question is, what is your purpose? And then you can see what would be the right indicators to use. What we figured in this analysis is that there was a gap in a system that would help companies be able to have a common picture at the corporate level, bringing together information from multiple activities, such as sites, products, and brands, in multiple raw materials and supply chains. So that is what we had found as the main gap. And within that gap, that kind of purpose, we realized that there are some common challenges that are related to achieving, using indicator for that. One is that, exactly, there are so many different, the diversity of sites makes it very challenging the attempt to aggregate into something that is meaningful at the corporate level. So I'm really looking at, we don't want to do a top down, but there is an aggregation where from where you have all your sites need to kind of still be meaningful when you get to one picture that you're trying to create at the corporate level. And the second point is very much linked to the first one, because biodiversity means so many different things. Well, first of all, it means it's diversity of genes, species, and ecosystems. So already within the same definition, you can look at different scales, but you can measure it in so many different ways. And depending on where you are and what are your impacts, and that will change. The other main challenge is that we are looking at a system that could help companies in different places in the value chain. So not just in primary extractive industries, but also in manufacturing. And their manufacturing footprint is really something that is challenging because you have to trace it back to what happens at the site. So our approach was, let's not offer something that is off the shelf, because we don't believe this is really the right approach, because the metric and the indicator that needs to be used have to be based on a question. What is the biodiversity question? What is your question? What is therefore your goal that you're trying to answer? And based on that, you can define what are the indicators that will help you answer that question. In the guidelines we tried, so we are very conscious that there are a lot of other processes ongoing, such as the GRI biodiversity indicator. Right now, I think they should be embarking also in a review of that, the science-based targets for biodiversity, the natural capital, the capital coalitions that is about to issue some guidance on biodiversity. So there are a lot of different processes that focus on biodiversity, which we committed to complement as much as possible. And one of the changes that we have, we're going to make in the final draft is to really make sure that in the introduction we have a clear also visual about how the process we are recommending sits vis-a-vis to the others. So one important thing is that the guidelines we have developed were really based on lessons from conservation biology and practice from conservation organizations. So we thought, this is about measuring impacts on biodiversity. Therefore, we need expertise in conservation. And we try to then complement that expertise in conservation with feedback from companies, from businesses in terms of how this knowledge and how these processes can work in the business, but effectively really entered into the discussion from a conservation perspective. So 3 main lessons is that, first of all, performance has to be measured against goals. I mean, to be very honest, this is a lesson from conservation biology, but it's a lesson from any management good practice. To have an indicator without knowing what is measuring is really giving a number that is out of context. So, but the best way to define your context is to define your goal, where you want to go. What is your goal as a corporate, where you want to be? Now, of course, there are a lot of opportunities in the consideration of what your goals to link to more global goals, for example, SDGs as well, or which are already existing. That many of the companies are already operating within the framework of SDGs, or the future biodiversity goals that CBD is discussing. Biodiversity is too complex as a concept to be considered in its entirety. Yes, so you will see in the guidelines we come up with the concept of priority, looking at what species at what taxonomic level, habitats are relevant, what kind of ecosystem services can be used, because you can't measure everything. You will spend, it's not going to be cost effective. What you're really trying to see is what kind of aspects are important because can be linked to the goal, and that because they can be basically aggregated. So we'll speak about aggregation in a bit. And the other lesson is really to use a framework that brings linked scalable indicators to address the second point, which is biodiversity is too complex, in order to give a complete picture. And I will explain that in the next slides. So the guidelines have been developed in cooperation with the IUCN Species Survival Commission and the monitoring specialist group led by PJ Stevenson, and they have been supported by the Alcoa Foundation, Boskalis, and Espresso, who contributed by also bringing their knowledge. And by, what we have done is in parallel of developing the guidelines, we have developed specific reports for Nespresso, Boskalis, and Alcoa, giving them recommendations based on their own operations, trying to implement the guidelines to their own business. And so this is generating 3 reports that will be, help the companies to develop their own frameworks. let me skip this one. So the main building blocks based on some of the challenges that I have addressed are, first of all, we're looking at the plan, do, check, act model, which is very also familiar to businesses, but basically is really about result-based management. That means the first thing we're looking at before even looking at what indicator you want to identify is, first of all, we are looking at what are your operations, what are the footprint, what type of footprint your operations have, and what would you like your goal to be. And once you know your goal, then you can define your basically actions to address the goal, to achieve these goals, and then the specific indicators that will help you know if you have achieved your goal, your objectives, and your responses. And this is a very logical approach. Of course, the big challenge is that every company might have different goals and therefore will have different indicators, which is a very different approach than GRI. And this is absolutely, let's say, it's absolutely aligned because the purpose of GRI is to give a common framework for reporting for corporate reporting and for outside communication, while the work we are doing is to help a company manage a corporate performance, which is a more management purpose. So the two aspects are absolutely complementary. The second building block of the guidelines is to have scalable goals and indicators. And this is critical because what we were saying is that you will need to start from site because that's where the footprint happens, which of course, it would be a very big challenge for manufacturing companies where they will have to kind of track down their for the raw materials down to the site level to be able to say something about the performance. But we all know that impact on biodiversity is local, so you need to have that information, at least an initial level of information, in order to be able to say something about the impact on biodiversity. So indicators that will enable the aggregation from site to different level all the way to corporate will have to be chosen, because if otherwise you cannot make this aggregation. So here are some of the examples, but in the report we have many more examples of what kind of aggregate type of indicators can be used for that are suitable for aggregation. These are, for example, what we imagine. You have site, or in this case, we have two countries, and basically you're aggregating bird abundance in two countries, and then you're gonna become, basically you're looking at an aggregation at the site, at the corporate level. The priority species will be different in Chile and Italy, definitely, but exactly, you're not looking at the specific species, but you're looking at the abundance. And therefore here you can say your story is about, your goal is about, maintaining abundance or increasing abundance. And therefore then you can aggregate from site all the way to corporate level. And the last one that is extremely important is the creating indicators that look at pressure, state, response, benefit into in creating a link in a real property or change connecting pressure, state, response, benefit. This is particularly important because in some situations, state indicators, which are really the ones that tell you the state of biodiversity, might not be always so easy to measure in the time frame that you need to use for management. So it is important, therefore, to have indicators that are absolutely connected in terms of the pressure and the state, and the response being the measures that you put in place in order to address the pressures. And the benefits are generally the values that people generate from biodiversity. So the connection between the four is clearly seen here, and this is what we are talking about, a theory of change, where the pressure has an effect on the state, and the state has an effect on the benefits. And then you have your conservation responses, and then basically you have the cycle. The importance is to connect the elements so that also the indicators are connected, and therefore you can imagine seeing your corporate picture from different lenses, from a lens that looks at the specific information on state, but not only looking also at the benefits and looking also at the responses that you're putting in place. So this is an overview of the guidelines. You have seen that we have organized them in 4 main stages. The first stage is really identifying priority, and this is where we are looking at, and to me, this is the most challenging one for businesses, especially businesses in the manufacturing that are far removed from site level, where, especially for sourcing of raw material, where raw material are the biggest footprint area, and therefore a lot of effort have to be put in place to be able to identify where the pressures are, identifying priority species. And what we have done in the guidelines is to give guidance on how to prioritize, but we are not creating rules because these rules will have to be sector and company specific, and the company might have different levels of, different risk appetite in terms of saying, we feel like we need to take more control or less control. You will see we're using the word control and influence because we realize that, we need to make sure that there is that element that has to be factored in terms of identifying priorities. The second stage is really to create what we call ambitions. And this is, as we said, this is in order to be able to define indicators, which is only stage 3. You have to look at your vision, goals and objectives, action and strategies. Then once you have that framework ready, then you can finally look at what kind of indicator you can use that can be aggregated, that look at pressure state response benefits. And then as the last stage, we provide a lot of good references in terms of how to collect, use data, dashboard and maps, all tools that can be used at the corporate level. So just to recap, we feel like these guidelines are really complementary to a lot of work out there, but they're also they keep a company at the center of our thinking to help manage, and they're really based on the experience and practice of conservation organizations, and they're really based on a very good, strong understanding of what tools and what are needed to kind of create this aggregated overview of what is happening in a portfolio of sites, which is the equivalent of a conservation organization portfolio of projects. So finally, these are the next steps. In theory, the draft is out for comments till the 30th of September. But of course, if any of you is interested in commenting and you need a few more days, we'll be happy to extend this deadline. We plan to finalize and publish the version 1.0 in January. And then to have, we are already working on a proposal to do an implementation phase in 2021, where we would like to bring a large group of companies together to implement the guidelines at the company level, but also to create opportunity for peer-to-peer learning, benchmarking, as well as opportunities for creating sector level common share goals and therefore indicators. So here is my email also, and I know Paz will also put it on her screen for more information and contact. And with this last slide, I thank you very much for your time. And I think now we are ready for having a chat. So let me stop sharing. Voilà, here we are.
Great. Thank you so much to you, Julia, for your very interesting presentation. I'm sure that after hearing you, many of our participants have been through many of the issues that you are mentioning and the problems that they have to manage in their daily lives when they have to manage the information about biodiversity at corporate level and at project level. So it would be great if you participants can share your experience and maybe tell us what are the main goals and the main challenges you are facing right now. I'm not sure if someone want to raise their hands and be the one sharing their experience.
I would like to add something to what Julia
Sure.
says. Julia, again, thank you so much for joining us and telling us all these guidelines from IUCN. I think it's a wonderful job you make in collaboration with Oxford and other people to bring these guidelines. And of course, as you mentioned at the end of your slides, we will be happy to help here from the Natural Capital Factory to implement these guidelines with our different sectoral working groups or different companies which are working with us in the Natural Capital Factory. I will have some questions or one question regarding your presentation about, for instance, about dependencies. Have you thought in the process how to link the pressure assessment that you mentioned with the different dependencies on biodiversity of companies?
Yes, thank you, David. It is generally we're looking at pressures and benefits, but the benefits we are looking at people's benefits. What you're right that you will be interesting to include the concept of dependency in terms of a company might also want to make sure that they keep track of the specific elements of biodiversity being a species or ecosystems or habitat or whatever indicator we are finding in order to track that. So I think probably we haven't put that enough accent on that, and it's certainly something that we should include in the first stage, and then from the first stage onward. So yeah, that's a very good point that we need to maybe to highlight not only the impact and the benefit, where the benefit are for people, so our ecosystem services, not necessarily, but it could be for the companies as well. But I think you're right that we need to make more obvious that we are looking also at benefits for the company.
Yes, because if you see in the third phase of the plan, you mentioned expressly the benefits to implementing these guidelines, and it's interesting. Of course, it's something which is really different depending on the sectoral that you're addressing, because it's not the same for all those who have a large dependence on raw materials than others that just have a little supply chain. But I think it should be really interesting to integrate it in somehow.
Yeah. Yes. Yes, thank you very much, David. We'll add something on that for sure.
I don't know if any other have any questions. I think it's a great opportunity to have here Julia with us. So please don't miss your opportunity to make a question to Julia.
Have any of you had the opportunity to review the guidelines, or maybe you knew about them but very recently, so you didn't have the chance? We don't have any answer, so probably you are too busy to to focus on different things than your own work. Okay. As Julia mentioned, we still have time in case that you're interested in sharing, your views and your comments on the guidelines, and you can share them with her directly, or through us as you prefer, and we will be happy, to support and to make your voice to be heard in this review.
Yeah, would be very, would be great if, any comment in terms of the structure, in terms of the tone, in terms of the level of details, in terms of, too much detail or not enough detail, would be very, very valuable, and we didn't provide on purpose a tracking sheet, but, people just to add comments directly into the PDF. So just, very rough saying, this is great, this section is fantastic, really clear. This one is much less clear, please, do something. But so for example, your comment about dependency is absolutely, important. This kind of, type of comments, you completely forgot this concept, this would be very valuable for us business. And of course, as well as if you have examples, like if you're already halfway through in implementing something like this, what we have seen with Nespresso and Boskalis, but especially Nespresso, is that in our attempt to set up the system for them, basically they have already very advanced. We are retrofitting the process because they had already done pretty much a good analysis of what their impacts were. They had already agreed on what is their scope of influence. They had already somehow agreed on what are the high level goals, let's say more division. So we kind of retrofitted a bit the first two stage, and then we provided more input on the third one, which is really trying to figure out a set of indicator that really fits the goals. So it's not a generic indicator, but it's a very specific indicator that can also be aggregated. So that's the part that we have focused the most. So what will be interesting to hear from companies is how much of this is already used. We hope a lot, because our objective wasn't to reinvent anything from scratch, but was to use existing systems such as, plan, do, check models, saying that companies are very familiar with, and say, okay, how do you use that approach in terms of that in a way that can help you create a corporate performance, monitoring system.
Yes, and as you mentioned, there are an increasingly number of indicator systems who can be used with this model.
Yeah.
And of course, we only need to think on how to report and disclose all this information, because you mentioned the URI system, but of course, URI system only includes the societal materiality, but it doesn't include anything regarding financial materiality for companies, and how do they need to address financial risk regarding biodiversity or the pressures on biodiversity. So I think these guidelines will provide a lot of light for companies in order to help to improve the reporting, disclosing, and management systems.
There is a comment from...
Go. There's a comment from, okay, you are reading it as well.
Yes, from Raquel. Yes, so this is a very good point. You pronounce your name Raquel?
Raquel.
Yes.
Perfect.
So, yes, it is. They're very complex, and in terms of data, is going to be complex, simply because at the end of the day, if we want to get to the level of being able to say something about the state of biodiversity, we will need data. And so we went back and forth, trying to say, how do we make it more simple? But there is a limit of, to make it still relevant. So there will be opportunities to use global data, but there will also, and we talk about that in the guidelines, a certain level to identify priorities. You can have some access to global database that generally are accessible through IBAT, for example, but there are a lot of other databases that we mentioned that can provide general information. But the assumption is also that site level will be able to generate information about specific, about species, about habitats, about ecosystems or ecosystem services. And that means in order to set up the system, there will be need for specialists, because it's not a metric such as greenhouse gas equivalent for climate change. there will be a lot of specificities that will be relevant to if you're operating in different biomes, you're operating in a deep sea, or you're operating, for example, in coastal environment. Coastal environments are completely different if we are looking at, we were working with boscalis from the Netherlands all the way to the coral reefs in Indonesia, very different. And so yes, there will be need to put some specialists at work, at least at the beginning, to set it up. And that goes with the problem because we are talking about biodiversity. So yes, a good database to start from is IBAT. IBAT will give you information about presence, proximity to protected areas, to species, and in terms of species also, what are the pressures in relation to the species. Then there is key biodiversity areas. So this is a good starting point. But then, to dive deeper, but for example, just the red list already, which you can access through IBAT, will give you already an information about what are the specific species that are threatened in that area, in that region. And as you said, yes, Ocean Data Viewer, and there are a number of others that can give you, information about what are the specific biodiversity characteristics.
Great. And further questions from anybody? Or not yet? Oh, I have one. The pilot stage that you mentioned that you are planning to start next year.
Yeah.
What are the stages? If any company is interested in joining this phase, what should they do? So
if what we are trying to put together now, we haven't, we are in the phase of putting together a set of activities that will make sense, so that is cost effective for companies as well as generate, the benefit. So a IUCN goal will be to mainstream these guidelines. So now we have developed the guidelines, and we would like now to create a phase where we promote the use of the guideline, we give visibility to companies that are using them, we learn from the use of the guidelines, and then maybe, and this is a test, is an hypothesis, if we put together enough companies of the same sector, maybe we could create even common goals and therefore indicators at the sectoral level. So this is a theory that we would like to test. So the structure we're looking at is to create a coalition of companies that want to come in, that will participate in a number of activities, will have access to experts in different, expertise that are relevant. So we're looking at experts in terms of, marine issues, terrestrial, different contexts, so that to be able to generate as specific as possible reports for the companies. So all the companies that will participate, each of them will get a report back, basically specific to their structure and their operations, but at the same time, they will contribute to lessons learned and by peer-to-peer learning. So I think at the moment, we're looking at putting together a group of around 20 companies so that we have enough critical mass also to be able to have the experts in a way that becomes, we create economies of scale so that, there is an experts in different areas that they can contribute to different companies, but also enough diversity in terms of sectors and in terms of maturity in implementing this. So if anybody is interested, of course, work with you, Paz, but also contact me, because we are kind of putting together the concept really these days.
Sure, will do. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, anybody else has any question for Julia or us? We'll be happy to solve it. Okay, I think that's all for today. Julia, thank you so much for your time and for bringing us the opportunity to have a real-time discussion with the Spanish business sector. I think that this has been an enriching session for everybody, and also for you, Julia.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. It was very useful, and thank you for your comments. And then let me know, drop me an email if you're planning to send more comments, so that we wait for you and we can extend, the comment phase for a few more days. All right.
We will do.
Thanks for organizing this. It's very appreciated.
Thank you so much, Julia. We will try to reach comments from our community here, and maybe to gather all this information, and in case we have something, we'll get it to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank
Have
you,
a good
Julia.
day. Bye.
Bye. Have a good